The screaming stopped 3 days ago. For 7 years, the people of Crete had grown accustomed to the sound, a bone-deep bellow that echoed from the bowels of the labyrinth every dawn, a cry so filled with rage and anguish that mothers would pull their children close and sailors would make the sign against evil. It was the voice of the Minotaur, King Minos' cursed stepson, roaring his fury at the rising sun from behind walls of stone that even the gods could not breach. But now, silence. Theseus stood at the mouth of the labyrinth, torch flickering in his trembling hand, and felt the weight of that silence pressing against his chest, like a physical thing. The bronze gates, carved with images of bulls and waves, and the double-headed axe of Crete, stood open for the first time in 7 years. No guards flanked them. No priests chanted protective wards. Even the sacred doves that nested in the lintel had abandoned their roosts. "Perhaps it's dead," whispered Phaedra from behind him, her voice barely audible over the night wind that moaned through the labyrinth's entrance. King Minos' youngest daughter had insisted on coming, despite Theseus's protests, despite the danger, despite the fact that her own half-brother waited somewhere in the maze's heart. Her hands shook as she clutched the ball of thread, Ariadne's thread, spun by her sister's own fingers and blessed by Athena herself. Perhaps the beast has finally starved. Theseus shook his head, dark hair catching the torchlight. He could feel it in there, whatever it was. Not death, but something else. Something that made his hero's blood run cold and his sword arm itch with unease. The labyrinth breathed around them, stone walls expanding and contracting like the ribs of some sleeping giant. And in that breathing, he heard something that chilled him more than any roar ever could. Whimpering, soft and broken and utterly, devastatingly human. "It's not dead," he said, and his voice cracked like a boy's. At 22, Prince Theseus of Athens had already slain the Pine-bender and the Iron-bed's bandit, had lifted the stone that concealed his father's sword and sandals, had volunteered to be tribute rather than watch 14 more Athenian children die in this cursed maze. He was a hero in the making, beloved of Poseidon, destined for songs and glory. So why did his hands shake as he tied Ariadne's thread around his wrist? "My lord," Phaedra touched his arm, her fingers ice-cold even through his chiton. "You don't have to do this. We could wait until morning, bring soldiers." "No." The word came out harsher than he intended. 7 years of tributes. 7 years of children fed to the monster in the maze. 14 from Athens alone, the best and brightest of his father's kingdom, sent to die because Minos' son Androgeos had fallen to an Athenian bull, and the Cretan king demanded blood payment 7 times 7. The oracle had said 7 groups of 7 years. And after that, nothing. The curse would be complete, the debt paid, but Athens would be a generation emptied of its future, unless someone broke it first. Theseus stepped, crossed the threshold, and the labyrinth swallowed him whole. The walls were not what he had expected. Stories spoke of rough-hewn stone, of a prison built in haste by the master craftsman Daedalus at King Minos' command. But these walls were smooth as glass, polished marble that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Frescoes covered every surface, not the usual Cretan images of bull dancers and sea gods, but something older, stranger. Spirals within spirals, patterns that hurt to look at directly. Symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when caught in the corner of his eye. The thread played out behind him as he walked, red as blood in the torch's wavering light. Ariadne had woven it herself in the 3 days since the screaming stopped, working by candlelight in her tower room, while her father raged and her sister wept. She had kissed him when she gave it to him, tasting of honey and tears and something that might have been goodbye. Bring him back, she had whispered against his lips. Whatever you find in there, whatever has happened to him, he was a child once. My baby brother. Bring him back. The passage branched ahead of him, left into darkness, right toward a faint, phosphorescent glow. Theseus hesitated, then followed. The light. The labyrinth was said to be impossible to navigate, full of false turns and dead ends. But something was calling to him, pulling him deeper. Not the monster. This feeling was gentler, sadder, like a lullaby half remembered from childhood. The walls began to change as he descended. The marble gave way to rougher stone, then to something that looked almost organic, smooth and curved like the inside of a shell, or perhaps a skull. The frescoes disappeared, replaced by scratches in the stone. Not random marks, Theseus realized as he held his torch closer. Words, letters carved by desperate fingers, some still sharp and fresh, others worn smooth by time. Help us. Athens remembers. Tell my mother I was brave. His torch guttered as a wind rose from nowhere, carrying with it the scent of straw and old blood and something else. Something sweet and cloying that made his stomach turn. Honey, perhaps, or flowers left too long in the sun. The light steadied, and Theseus saw that the passage ahead opened into a vast chamber, circular and domed, with galleries carved into the walls at 7 different levels. At the center, on a raised dais, surrounded by what had once been altars, and was now a garden of scattered bones. Something moved. The Minotaur was not what the stories claimed. Oh, it had the head of a bull, massive and black, with horns that curved like crescent, moons and eyes that reflected Theseus's torchlight like pools of liquid amber. Its body was human in shape but gigantic in scale, easily twice the height of a man, with muscles that spoke of terrible strength. But it was curled on its side like a sleeping child, knees drawn up to its chest, one massive hand pillowed beneath its great head, and it was crying. The sound was barely audible, more felt than heard, a rhythmic shuddering that made the bones around it rattle softly against the stone. Tears the size of pearls ran down its muzzle, pooling in the dust between its hooves. Its other hand was wrapped around something small and white, clutching it to its chest with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such a creature. Theseus took a step forward, then another. His sword stayed sheathed at his side. This was not what he had come to fight. This was not a monster at all, but something else entirely. Something that had been made into a monster, perhaps, but remained at its heart achingly, impossibly human. "Are you him?" he called softly, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Are you Asterion?" The creature's head lifted slowly, and Theseus found himself looking into eyes that were not the eyes of a beast at all, but of a young man, intelligent, aware, and filled with such profound sadness that it took his breath away. The Minotaur, Asterion, for that had been his name before the curse, before the shame, before his mother's shame and his stepfather's rage. had condemned him to this living death, regarded him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse but unmistakably human, tinged with an accent that spoke of palace nurseries and tutors who had tried, against all hope, to educate a prince who wore the face of a bull. "You're not food," Asterion said, and there was wonder in his voice. "You're talking to me." "I am." Theseus moved closer, slowly, the way one might approach a wounded animal. "My name is Theseus. I've come from Athens." Something flickered in those amber eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or pain. "Athens sends the food," Asterion said, and his voice broke like a child's. "Every year, Athens sends me children to eat. I don't want to eat them, but I get so hungry, and they scream so much, and Father says. He trailed off, great head shaking slowly from side to side. The thing in his hand, Theseus could see now that it was a small marble figurine. A girl in a dancing pose caught the torchlight and gleamed. "What does your father say?" Theseus asked gently. "That I'm a monster." The words came out in a rush, as if they had been held back too long. "That I'm punishment for mother's sin. That I must stay here and guard the tribute. That I must feast on flesh because that's what monsters do. But I don't want to be a monster, Athenian. I never wanted to be a monster." Asterion's free hand touched his bull's head, running over the coarse fur between his horns with something like disgust. "I remember being small. I remember Mother singing to me before Father found out what I was. I remember having a nurse who told me stories, and tutors who taught me letters and numbers and the names of stars. I remember when Ariadne was born, how small she was, how she would wrap her tiny fingers around mine and laugh." His voice cracked again, and fresh tears began to flow. "But then Father sent me here, and the hunger came, and the rage, and I became what he said I was. What everyone said I was. A beast, a monster, a thing that devours children and roars at the sun." Theseus felt something twist in his chest, a pain sharp as any sword thrust. "What changed?" he asked. 3 days ago the roaring stopped. What happened 3 days ago?" Asterion's grip tightened on the figurine, and when he looked up, his eyes were pools of liquid amber shot through with grief. "She came to see me," he whispered. "My sister, my little sister Ariadne. She found a way into the maze, past the guards, past Father's wards. She came to see what had become of her brother." The great creature struggled to sit up, moving with the careful slowness of something in great pain. When he had managed it, Theseus could see the full tragedy of what he was. 8 feet tall and broad as an ox, but with hands that held a child's toy with infinite tenderness, with a face that wore the features of a beast, but the expression of a heartbroken young man. "She brought me this," Asterion said, holding up the figurine. "A dancer. She said she remembered how I used to love to watch the bull dancers in the court, how I would clap and laugh when they leaped over the horns. She said she wanted me to remember that I was more than what they made me." He cradled the marble girl against his chest and rocked slowly back and forth, a motion that spoke of old comfort, of a mother's arms and lullabies sung in the deep of night. "She told me she was sorry," he continued, voice barely above a whisper. "Sorry that she never came before. Sorry that she let Father convince her I was lost. Sorry that she believed the stories about the monster in the maze. She said she loved me, that she had always loved me, even when I was this. Asterion looked up at Theseus then, and the hero saw something in those amber eyes that made his throat close with unexpected emotion. Hope. Desperate, fragile hope. She said someone was coming who might be able to help me. Someone brave and kind and strong enough to see past what I appeared to be. Was that... Did she mean you? Theseus found his voice with effort. I think she might have. But I don't understand. Asterion's great head tilted to one side, the gesture heartbreakingly human despite his bull's features. You came here to kill me, didn't you? That's what heroes do. They slay monsters and rescue princesses and win glory. I am the monster in this story, Theseus of Athens. I am the thing that devours children and terrorizes kingdoms. Shouldn't you draw your sword and finish what 7 years of tribute could not? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with years of pain and isolation, and a kind of terrible honesty that cut deeper than any blade. Theseus looked at this creature, this young man cursed with a bull's head and a giant's body, condemned to a life of solitude and hunger and the slow corruption of his own humanity, and felt something shift inside him, some fundamental understanding of what heroism really meant. Maybe, he said slowly, the real monster isn't you at all. Asterion's eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked so young, so hopeful, that Theseus had to look away. When he turned back, the Minotaur was studying him with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. You don't know, do you? Asterion said, suddenly, about the curse, about why I'm really here. I know your mother lay with the white bull, Theseus replied carefully. I know King Minos was displeased. A sound escaped Asterion that might have been laughter if it hadn't been so bitter. My mother lay with the bull because Father commanded it, because he was too proud to sacrifice Poseidon's gift as the god demanded, too arrogant to admit his mistake when the Sea Lord's anger turned upon our house. The curse was his doing, Athenian. The shame was his choice. And when I was born bearing its mark, he couldn't destroy me. I was still his wife's son, still royal blood. So he did something worse. The great creature's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than any roar. He made me into exactly what his pride had created. He locked me away and fed me rage and hunger until I became the monster he needed me to be. The beast that would justify his shame. The creature that would make everyone forget that this was his fault, not mine, not Mother's. Asterion stood then, rising to his full, impressive height, and Theseus saw him truly for the first time, not as a monster, but as a young man who had been systematically broken and reshaped into something convenient for his stepfather's conscience. 7 years, Asterion continued, beginning to pace around the chamber with restless energy. 7 years of children sent to feed the beast. 7 years of their screams, teaching me that I was what everyone said I was. 7 years of growing hungrier and angrier, and more lost until I could barely remember my own name, let alone the boy who used to love music and poetry, and the way sunlight looked on water. He stopped, turning those amber eyes back to Theseus with an intensity that made the hero's breath catch. But Ariadne remembered. She came here 3 days ago and spoke my name, my real name, not Minotaur or beast or monster, and suddenly I could hear myself again. Suddenly, I remembered what I had been before. This place made me forget. And the children? Theseus asked, though he dreaded the answer. The tributes? What happened to them? Asterian's face crumpled, and he sank back down to his knees among the scattered bones. I tried not to, he whispered. At first, I tried so hard not to. I would hide from them, hope they would find their way out somehow. But the hunger, it comes with the rage, you see. Part of the curse. And when it takes hold, I become something else. Something that thinks only of feeding, of ending the noise they make. He buried his great head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I remember fragments, terrible fragments. The taste of fear, the way they begged, the sound bones make when they... I remember, and I wish I didn't. I wish I could forget. But Ariadne's visit brought it all back. All the horror of what I've done, what I've become. Theseus felt his own eyes burn with unexpected tears. This was not the monster he had come to slay. This was a victim. Perhaps the greatest victim of all in this long, bloody tragedy. A young man destroyed by his stepfather's pride and remade into an instrument of that same pride's justification. How many? He asked softly. 93. The number came without hesitation, spoken with the precision of someone who had counted every single death, who carried each one like a stone in his heart. 93 children over 7 years. I know all their names. I made myself remember their names after. It seemed the least I could do. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft sound of Asterian's breathing and the distant whisper of wind through the labyrinth's passages. Theseus stood in that silence and felt the weight of all his assumptions crumbling around him. He had come here to be a hero, to slay the monster and free Athens from its terrible tribute. But there was no monster here to slay. Only a broken young man who had been made into a weapon against his will and then forced to use it. What do you want? Theseus asked finally. If you could have anything, if the choice were yours, what would you want? Asterion looked up at him with those heartbreakingly human eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was soft as a prayer. I want to go home, he said. I want to see the sun again, and feel the wind from the sea, and hear music that isn't screaming. I want to tell my mother I'm sorry for what I became. I want to ask Ariadne to forgive me for the children I couldn't save. I want... He paused, struggling with words too large for even his considerable voice. I want to be Asterion again, just for a little while before I die. I want to remember what it felt like to be human. The request hung in the air between them, simple and impossible and utterly heartbreaking. Theseus felt something settle in his chest, a certainty that surprised him with its strength. He had come here to be a hero, and perhaps he still could be, just not in the way anyone expected. Then, that's what we'll do, he said, and his voice carried the weight of an oath. Asterion stared at him, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. You can't mean that. I'm a monster, Theseus. I've killed 93 children. I've torn families apart and fed on innocence and made myself into everything dark and terrible that lurks in the human heart. You can't just decide I'm worth saving. Can't I? Theseus moved closer, close enough to see the golden flecks in those amber eyes, close enough to smell the scent of old straw and tears, and something that might have been hope. You said it yourself. You were made into this, shaped by pride and cruelty and a king's refusal to face his own responsibility. But underneath it all, you're still Asterion. Still the boy who loved to watch dancers and listen to music and hold his baby sister's hand. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movements, and laid one hand gently on the creature's massive forearm. The skin was warm, human despite its size, and Theseus felt the tremor that ran through the powerful frame at his touch. The monster was never you, Theseus said quietly. It was what was done to you, and if it was made, then maybe, just maybe, it can be unmade. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, Asterion's free hand came up to cover Theseus's, fingers careful and gentle despite their size. You really believe that? He whispered. I do. Even after everything I've done, even knowing what I am, especially knowing what you are. Theseus squeezed the massive hand gently. You're not a monster, Asterion. You're a survivor, and it's time you came home. The first thing they had to do was get past the guards. Theseus had not seen them on his way in. The labyrinth's entrance had been deserted. The bronze gate is standing open like an invitation. But as he and Asterion made their careful way through the winding passages, following the red thread back toward the surface, voices began to echo from ahead. Harsh voices, speaking in Cretan dialect, arguing about something in tones that carried the weight of authority and fear. Father's men, Asterion whispered, his great bulk somehow managing to move with surprising stealth through the narrower passages. In the hours since Theseus had found him, something had changed in the creature's bearing. The defeated slump was gone from his shoulders, replaced by a careful alertness that spoke of hope, fragile and tentative, but real. He must have decided the silence has gone on long enough. They paused at a junction where 4 passages met, and Theseus held up his torch to study the walls. The thread led straight ahead, but voices came from that direction. At least 6 men by his count, probably armed. To the left, another passage curved away into darkness. To the right, a narrow stair climbed upward, carved directly into the living rock. Is there another way out? Theseus asked quietly. Asterion's bull head tilted as he considered. The labyrinth has 7 levels, he said after a moment. I know them all. 7 years gives you time to explore every corner of your prison. There are 3 ways to the surface. The main entrance where you came in, an old drainage tunnel that opens near the harbor, and... He paused, something complicated passing over his features. And... the royal way, Asterion finished reluctantly. A passage that leads directly to the palace. Daedalus built it for Father, so he could come and observe when the tribute was fed to the beast. He never used it, too ashamed, I think, or perhaps too afraid of what he might see. But it's there. The voices ahead grew louder, and Theseus heard the distinctive scrape of bronze on stone that meant drawn swords. Whatever King Minos's guards had come to do, they were prepared for violence. The royal way it is, Theseus decided. Can you lead us there? Are you certain? Astrion's voice carried a note of old pain. If we use that passage, we'll emerge directly into the heart of the palace. Father will be there, and the court, and everyone who knows what I am. Everyone who sent their children to feed me. Theseus met those amber eyes steadily. You said you wanted to go home. This is home, isn't it? The palace where you were born, where your mother sang you lullabies, where your sister learned to walk. Yes, but then that's where we're going. Theseus's voice carried the quiet certainty of a man who had made his choice and would not be moved from it. You've spent 7 years hiding in the dark, Asterion. It's time to step into the light. The passage to the royal way was narrow and steep, clearly not meant for something of Asterion's size. The creature had to hunch his shoulders and duck his great head, moving carefully to avoid scraping his horns against the low ceiling. But he pressed on without complaint, and Theseus found himself impressed by the quiet determination that had replaced the earlier despair. As they climbed, Asterion began to speak, softly, almost to himself, but Theseus caught the words in the echoing space. "I used to dream about this," the creature murmured. "In the early years, before the hunger made everything else fade away, I would dream about walking these passages again, about coming home. But in the dreams, I was myself, the way I was before, small and human, and..." He touched his bull's head with one massive hand. "Not this. You are yourself," Theseus said firmly. "The shape doesn't matter. What matters is what's inside. And inside, you're still the boy who loved music and protected his little sister, and tried, despite everything, to hold on to his humanity." They emerged into a wider passage, this one lined with the same smooth marble as the upper levels. Frescoes covered the walls here too, but these were different. Not the strange, spiraling symbols of the depths, but familiar Cretan scenes, pole dancers leaping over horns, dolphins playing in stylized waves, priestesses with snakes coiled around their arms. Asterion stopped before one particular image, a family scene, a queen with dark hair holding a small child, while a king in golden robes looked on. The child in the painting had a human face, sweet and laughing, with amber eyes that seemed to dance with mischief. "Mother commissioned this," Asterion said quietly, reaching out to trace the painted child's face with one careful finger. "Before Father knew what I would become, she wanted to capture how I looked when I laughed. She said," his voice caught, "she said I had the most beautiful laugh in all the world." "You still do," said a voice from the shadows ahead of them. Theseus spun, hand moving instinctively to his sword hilt. But Asterion's sharp intake of breath stopped him. A figure stepped into the torchlight, a woman in her middle years, still beautiful despite the lines of sorrow around her eyes, wearing the simple white robes of mourning. Queen Pasiphae, wife of Minos, mother of monsters and heroes alike. "Mother," Asterion's voice broke like a child's, and suddenly he was moving, not with the careful stealth he had maintained in the passages, but with desperate, stumbling urgency. He fell to his knees before the queen, his great head bowed, and Theseus saw his massive shoulders shake with silent sobs. "My son," Pasiphae whispered, and her hands, small and delicate against his bulk, came up to cradle his bull's head with infinite tenderness. "My dear son, I have waited so long to hold you again." "I'm sorry," Asterion choked out, the words muffled against her robes. "Mother, I'm so sorry for what I became, for the children, for the shame I brought to our house." "Hush," the queen's voice carried all the authority of royalty and all the gentleness of motherhood. You were never the shame, my darling boy. Never that. The shame was mine for letting your father convince me you were lost. The shame was his for making you into a weapon to serve his pride. She looked up at Theseus then, and he saw in her eyes the same terrible intelligence that marked her son, the same capacity for love and pain and hope. You are the one Ariadne spoke of, she said, and it wasn't a question. The hero who would see past the surface to the heart beneath. I am Theseus of Athens, your majesty. Athens. Something flickered in her expression. Pain, perhaps, or regret. You have lost much to our family's curse, Prince of Athens. 93 of your young people sent to feed a monster that was never truly a monster at all. 93 too many, Theseus agreed quietly. But perhaps their deaths were not entirely in vain. If they can help us find a way to break the cycle. Pasiphae studied him for a long moment, and Theseus had the uncomfortable sensation of being weighed and measured by something far more ancient and dangerous than simple maternal love. You speak of breaking cycles, she said finally. But do you understand what that means? Do you know what it will cost? Before Theseus could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the passage behind them. Many footsteps, moving with military precision. King Minos' guards had found their trail. This way, Pasiphae said urgently, gathering her robes. Quickly now. There is little time, and much that must be done. She led them through a hidden door Theseus had not even noticed, into a narrow surface corridor that ran parallel to the main passage. Behind them, voices shouted in discovery. The guards had found the place where they had turned aside. The king knows, Pasiphae said as they hurried through the cramped space. Ariadne could not keep the secret. When she returned from the labyrinth 3 days ago, changed and weeping, Minos pressed her until she told him everything about her visit to Asterion, about the hero she had sent to face him, about the thread she had spun and the hope she dared to harbor. Is she safe? Asterion asked anxiously. Ariadne, did father punish her for? She is under guard but unharmed, his mother assured him. Minos may be many things, but he will not raise his hand against his acknowledged daughter. Not yet, at any rate. They emerged into a wider space. Not a room, exactly, but a sort of junction where several service corridors met. Carved niches in the walls held oil lamps that cast dancing shadows across ancient stone, and the air carried the faint scent of incense and old flowers. Where are we? Theseus asked. The heart of the palace, Pasiphae replied. These are the oldest passages, built when the first kings ruled in Knossos. They run beneath the throne room, beneath the great court, beneath all the spaces where power is displayed and exercised. She turned to face them both, and her expression was grave. And they are where we must make our choice. What choice? Asterion asked, though something in his voice suggested he already knew. His mother reached into her robes and withdrew a small vial filled with liquid that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Even in the lamplight it was clearly visible, pearl white, opalescent, beautiful, and terrible at once. The curse that made you as you are was born of divine anger, she said quietly. Poseidon's wrath at your father's pride, channeled through my body and into your flesh. It cannot be broken by mortal means, but it can be redirected. She held up the vial and Theseus saw that her hand trembled slightly. This is water from Lethe, the river of forgetting, mixed with tears shed in true sorrow, blessed by Hecate herself in the dark of the moon. One sip, and the curse will release its hold on you. The bull's head will fade, the giant's strength will ebb, and you will return to what you were meant to be. Astarion stared at the vial with a hunger that was almost painful to witness. And the cost, he asked quietly. Everything you have become in these 7 years will be forgotten, Pasiphae said, and her voice was steady despite the tears that ran down her cheeks. The pain, yes, but also the strength that came from surviving it. The monster, yes, but also the compassion that kept the boy alive inside the beast. You will be Astarion again, fully, truly, completely Astarion, but you will not remember being anything else. The children, Astarion whispered, their names. I won't remember their names. No, his mother confirmed. You will not remember what you did to them, or the guilt that has eaten at your heart, or the terrible hunger that drove you to it. You will wake as the young man you were at 17, before the worst of the curse took hold, and all of this will be like a dream, half forgotten upon waking. Astarion closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Theseus saw a pain there deeper than any physical wound. But they deserve to be remembered, the creature said. The children who died because of what I became. They deserve to have someone carry their names, someone who knows what they suffered and grieves for them. If I forget, if I drink and become innocent again, who will remember Alexios of Athens, who tried to comfort the others even as he died? Who will remember Corinna of Megara, who sang lullabies in the dark until the hunger took me and I silenced her forever? Astarion, his mother said gently, you cannot carry that guilt forever. It will destroy you. Perhaps it should, he replied. Perhaps that's the only justice left for someone who has done what I've done. No. The word came from Theseus, sharp and certain. Both mother and son turned to look at him, and he stepped forward, torch held high. No, he repeated. You don't get to choose martyrdom, Astarion. You don't get to carry that guilt as some kind of penance, because the guilt isn't yours to carry. You were 17 years old when your father locked you away. 17, and already transformed by a curse you had no part in making. Everything that happened after that, every death, every moment of rage and hunger and despair, that was the curse's doing, not yours. But I remember, Astarion began. You remember fragments, Theseus cut him off. Pieces of madness and transformation, and a curse that twisted your mind as thoroughly as it twisted your body. But that wasn't you, don't you see? That was never you. He moved closer, close enough to see the pain and confusion warring in those amber eyes. The boy who loved music and protected his sister and tried to be gentle even when gentleness was being torn from him. That boy is still here. Still. You. The monster was something else entirely. Something imposed from without. And you have the chance, now, to let it go. To be free of it completely. But the children will be remembered, Theseus said firmly. Not by the creature that killed them, but by the people who loved them. By Athens, which mourns them still. By history, which will record their sacrifice and the courage they showed in facing death so young. Their names won't be lost just because you let go of the guilt that's been poisoning you. Astarion stared at him for a long moment, then looked back at his mother and the vial in her trembling hand. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Something you haven't told me." Pacify's composure cracked slightly. "What do you mean?" "The curse was meant to last 7 times 7 years, Asterion said. 49 years of tribute, 49 years of the monster in the maze. But it's only been 7. If I drink this, if I become human again, what happens to the remaining 42 years? Where does that dead go?" The silence that followed was profound and terrible. When Pasiphae finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The curse will seek another vessel," she admitted. "Another child of our bloodline to carry its weight. Ariadne or Phaedra, or..." She closed her eyes. "Or any child born to this house in the years to come." "No." Asterion's voice was flat, final. "No, I won't let that happen. I won't pass this poison on to someone else, especially not to my sisters. My son." "No, Mother." He straightened to his full height, and for a moment he looked not like a monster or a victim, but like what he truly was, a prince of Crete, a young man who had found his strength at last. "I've spent 7 years learning what it means to be the monster in someone else's story. I won't make Ariadne into that. I won't let her children grow up knowing that their curse was the price of my freedom." He turned to Theseus, and his expression was calm, almost peaceful. "There is another way," he said. "Isn't there? Something you haven't told me." Theseus felt his throat close because yes, there was another way, and he had been hoping desperately that they wouldn't have to speak of it. "Tell me," Asterion said gently. "The curse can be broken," Theseus said finally. "Not redirected, not transferred, but broken completely. If..." He swallowed hard. "If the vessel dies willingly, in full knowledge of what he is and what he's done, with genuine sorrow for the pain he's caused. If he chooses to end it, to take the curse with him into death rather than let it continue, then the debt is paid and the cycle ends forever." "Theseus, no," Pasiphae whispered, but Asterion was nodding slowly, as if this was what he had expected all along. "That's why you really came, isn't it?" he asked. "Not to slay the monster, but to help me find the courage to make this choice. To die as Asterion, rather than live as the Minotaur." "I came to help you," Theseus said, "whatever form that help might take. And this is the help I need." Asterion looked around the ancient chamber one last time, then back at his mother. May I see her? Ariadne, before I..." Pasiphae's face crumbled, but she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course. She's been waiting for you." The throne room of Knossos was as magnificent as any hall Theseus had ever seen. Soaring columns, painted with spirals and sea creatures. Walls covered in frescoes that seemed to move in the flickering light of 100 oil lamps. Floors of polished marble that reflected the glory above like still water. But tonight, it felt like a tomb, heavy with the weight of 7 years' worth of secrets and lies and carefully maintained fictions. King Minos sat on his golden throne, magnificent in his robes of state, but Theseus could see the fear in his eyes as they emerged from the hidden passage. Around the throne, courtiers and guards stood in careful formation, but their attention was not on their king. It was on the creature that walked beside the foreign prince, the monster that had haunted. their nightmares for 7 years. Asterion entered his father's presence without cowering, without apology, but also without threat. He moved with dignity despite his bull's head and giant's frame, and Theseus found himself thinking that this was what true royalty looked like. Not gold and ceremony, but the quiet courage to face one's fate with grace. "Father," Asterion said, and his voice carried across the great hall with the clarity of bronze on bronze. Minos said nothing. His hands gripped the arms of his throne until his knuckles went white, and his face was the color of old parchment. He looked, Theseus realized, like a man who had spent 7 years trying to forget something and had just been forcibly reminded of it. "I have come to say goodbye," Asterion continued, "and to tell you that I forgive you." A sound rippled through the assembled court, gasps, murmurs, the soft scrape of hands moving to sword hilts. But Asterion paid them no mind. His attention was fixed on the man who had shaped his fate. "I forgive you for the pride that brought Poseidon's curse upon our house," he said. "I forgive you for choosing to make me your monster rather than face your shame. I forgive you for the children you fed to that monster, and for the years you let me believe that I was truly the beast you needed me to be." Minos finally found his voice, though it came out as little more than a croak. You were never supposed to think, to remember, to remain human despite everything you did to make me otherwise." Asterion's tone was gentle, almost compassionate. "I know, Father. That would have made it so much easier for you, wouldn't it, if I had truly become just a beast, with no memory of who I was before, no understanding of what you had made me do?" He took a step closer to the throne, and several guards shifted nervously. "But I did remember," Asterion said. "Even in the worst moments, even when the hunger was strongest and the rage consumed everything else, some part of me remembered being your stepson, being Ariadne's brother, being the boy who used to sit in this very hall and listen to the singers tell stories of heroes and monsters, never imagining that one day I would be both." "Stop," Minos whispered. "The curse ends with me," Asterion said firmly. "I won't let it pass to another generation. I won't let Ariadne's children grow up in the shadow of what you made me become. The debt will be paid tonight, and our house will be free." "Asterion, no." The voice came from the side of the hall, high and clear and desperate. Ariadne broke from her guards and ran toward her brother, her dark hair streaming behind her like a banner. "Please, there has to be another way." Asterion caught her as she flung herself against his massive chest, his arms coming around her with infinite gentleness. She was so small against his bulk, like a child seeking comfort from a parent, and Theseus felt his own eyes burn as he watched the giant creature hold his sister with all the tenderness in the world. "My darling girl," Asterion murmured, his voice soft enough that only she and Theseus could hear. "My brave, wonderful sister. You saved me, you know. When you came to see me 3 days ago, when you reminded me who I was beneath all the rage and hunger, you gave me back my soul, and now I can choose to keep it. By dying," Ariadne pulled back to look up at him, tears streaming down her face. "By leaving me alone with him." She gestured toward their father, her voice breaking. "I can't, Asterion. I can't lose you again. Not when I just got you back. You'll never lose me, Asterion said gently. Not really. I'll always be with you. In the music you love, in the stories you tell your own children someday, in every act of kindness you show to someone the world has forgotten or cast aside, I'll be there. He looked around the great hall one last time, his gaze touching on faces that had once been familiar, courtiers who had watched him grow up, servants who had cared for him as a child, nobles who had sent their own children to die in his maze. I want you all to remember, he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the vast space. When you tell the story of what happened here, when you speak of the monster in the labyrinth and the hero who came to face him, remember that monsters are made, not born. Remember that sometimes the greatest evil is not in the creature that commits terrible acts, but in the choices that create such creatures in the first place. His gaze found his stepfather's eyes and held them steadily. And remember that redemption is always possible, even for monsters, if they choose to embrace it. Minos opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. He looked, Theseus thought, like a man watching his own soul laid bare before the world, and finding it wanting. Asterion turned back to Ariadne, cupping her face gently in his massive hands. Be happy, he told her. Fall in love, have children, write poetry, dance under the stars. Live, my sister. Live enough for both of us. Asterion. And forgive him if you can, Asterion added, nodding toward their father. Not for his sake, but for yours. Carrying hatred is like carrying poison. It will destroy you from within if you let it. He kissed her forehead gently, then straightened and turned to Theseus. Thank you, he said simply, for seeing me, for believing I was worth saving, even when I couldn't believe it myself. You were always worth saving, Theseus replied, his voice rough with emotion. I only wish. No wishes, Asterion said firmly. No regrets. This is my choice, freely made, and I am at peace with it. He walked to the center of the great hall, directly beneath the painted image of the sacred bulls that dominated the ceiling. There, in full view of the court that had sent 93 children to their deaths, he knelt and placed his hands flat on the marble floor. What happened next was not dramatic. There was no flash of light, no thunder from the heavens, no visible sign that divine will was being enacted. Asterion simply closed his eyes, bowed his great head, and spoke a single word. Enough. The change began slowly, so slowly that at first Theseus thought nothing was happening. But then he saw it, the massive frame beginning to shrink, the bull's head softening and reshaping itself, the coarse hide giving way to human skin. The curse was unwinding itself, retreating back to whatever divine realm had spawned it, and taking with it 7 years of monstrous hunger and rage and pain. But it was taking more than that, as Asterion's body returned to human proportions, as his bull's head became the face of a young man with amber eyes and gentle features. His breathing grew labored. The curse was demanding its price, not just transformation, but life itself. Asterion, Ariadne started toward him, but Pasiphae caught her arm, holding her back. The queen was weeping silently, but her grip was firm. Let him go, she whispered. Let him go with dignity. The young man who had been the Minotaur raised his head one last time, and Theseus saw that he was beautiful, not handsome in the way of heroes or kings, but beautiful in the way of someone who had found peace at last. His eyes found Ariadne's across the hall, and he smiled with all the love in the world. "Remember me," he said, and his voice was fully human now, warm and rich and achingly familiar to those who had known him as a child. "But remember me dancing." And then Prince Asterion of Crete, who had been a monster for 7 years and a hero for 7 minutes, closed his eyes and let the last of his breath slip away like a sigh. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the oil lamps seemed to burn more quietly, as if the very air of the great hall was holding its breath in respect for what had just passed. King Minos sat frozen on his throne, staring at the still form of his stepson with an expression of such profound loss that Theseus almost pitied him. Almost. It was Ariadne who finally broke the silence, her voice clear and steady despite her tears. "He was my brother," she said, and every word rang like a bell through the vast space. "He was kind and gentle, and he loved music and poetry, and the way sunlight looked on water. He protected me when we were children, and he tried to protect those who were sent to him, even when a curse made him into something he never chose to be." She looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of courtiers and guards and nobles who had spent 7 years pretending that the creature in the labyrinth was just a beast, just a convenient monster to blame for their king's sins. "That is how he will be remembered," she said firmly. "Not as the Minotaur, not as a monster, but as Prince Asterion, who chose love over hatred, sacrifice over selfishness, and redemption over revenge. And if anyone in this hall speaks of him differently, if anyone dares to remember him as anything less than the hero he truly was, they will answer to me." The threat in her voice was unmistakable, and Theseus found himself smiling despite his grief. Ariadne was her brother's sister, all right. Gentle when she could be, fierce when she had to be, and utterly uncompromising when it came to protecting those she loved, even in death. King Minos finally found his voice, though it came out broken and barely audible. "The tribute," he said, "Athens, the debt, is paid," Theseus said firmly. "In full and forever. The curse is broken, your majesty. There will be no more children sent to feed monsters that should never have existed in the first place." Minos nodded slowly, and Theseus was surprised to see tears on the king's cheeks. Whether they were tears of grief or guilt or simple relief, he couldn't tell. Perhaps all three. "The ships," Minos said after a moment. "The Athenian ships in our harbor. They can depart when they wish, with whomever they wish to take with them." It was as close to an admission of guilt as they were likely to get, Theseus realized, and perhaps it was enough. He looked down at the still form of the young man who had been brave enough to choose death over the perpetuation of evil, and felt something settle in his chest. Not quite peace, but a kind of weary satisfaction. This was not the heroic tale he had expected to live, but it was perhaps a more important one. Sometimes the greatest victory was not in slaying the monster, but in helping it find the courage to slay itself. The ships that sailed from Crete the next morning carried more than just the living. By Pasiphae's command and Ariadne's insistence, they bore the body of Prince Asterion, wrapped in cloth of gold and surrounded by flowers and the kind of honors usually reserved for the greatest of heroes. he would be buried in Athens, in sight of the sea he had loved as a child, with a marker that told his true story for any who cared to read it. Ariadne sailed with them, her few possessions packed in a single chest, her mother's blessing and her father's silent acquiescence. She stood at the ship's rail as Crete faded behind them, one hand resting on the marble figurine her brother had died clutching, the little dancer that would serve as his memorial in the palace of Athens, a reminder that even in the darkest places, beauty and love could survive. "Do you think he was right?" she asked Theseus as they watched the sun set over the wine-dark sea. "About forgiveness, I mean. About letting go of hatred." Theseus considered the question, thinking of a young man who had found the strength to forgive even those who had destroyed him, who had chosen love over revenge even in his final moments. "I think," he said finally, "that your brother was wiser than any of us. Hatred is a poison, just as he said, and the only way to honor his sacrifice is to refuse to let it poison us." Ariadne nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the marble dancer's delicate features. "Then that's what I'll do," she said. "I'll forgive my father, and I'll remember my brother dancing, and I'll try to live a life worthy of the love he showed me." "And I'll help you," Theseus promised, "if you'll let me." She smiled then, the first real smile he had seen from her since they left the labyrinth, and Theseus felt something warm unfurl in his chest. There would be time for love later, time for healing, time for the kind of happiness that Asterion had wanted for his sister. But for now, it was enough to sail toward Athens with the setting sun, painting the sky gold and red, carrying the story of a monster who chose to be human, and a hero who learned that sometimes the greatest courage is knowing when not to fight. Behind them, Crete disappeared into the gathering darkness, taking with it 7 years of tribute and terror and carefully maintained lies. Ahead lay Athens and home, and the chance to tell a different kind of story, one where monsters could be redeemed, where heroes could show mercy, and where even the darkest curses could be broken by the simple, radical choice to love rather than hate. The Minotaur was dead. Long live Prince Asterion, who had danced with death and taught the world that sometimes the greatest victory is in laying down one's arms and choosing at last to be at peace.